Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to have an interview with a very special guest. He's Professor Dr. Pineu. He's from the University of Coimbra. And we're going to talk about his presentation today, which is called Entre Utopia and Dystopia, o conceito da segurança na prática contemporânea. So we're going to talk today a little bit about the concept of Utopia and Dystopia related to our project and to see how they mingle or what's the interplay or their role in your presentation.
Yeah.
So talking about that, I see that your background is about critical security studies, technology, international affairs, and the role of culture in these matters. So having that in mind and thinking about the idea of utopia and dystopia, how would you describe the role of these concepts along the axis of your work?
I was just talking today with colleagues about precisely this, that it's very interesting how so much of what's currently happening in terms of not only problems in the real world, international political problems and security issues that are being discussed in media, discussed in classrooms, that have clearly both a utopian and a dystopian overtones or concerns enmeshed in them. So that's interesting in its own right, but also how the discipline of security studies, including critical security studies, really doesn't make much use of this way of thinking. So it doesn't really use utopia that much. As I would say, there are clearly strands of thinking in security studies that have to do with peace, perpetual peace, positive peace, other sort of projects that have very clear utopian legacies and understandings of the future. Yes. There's also a great deal of concern in some of the areas that I'm currently working on that have to do with drones, technology and privacy and surveillance in the modern era, that in a large way intersect with popular culture dystopian visions of the future, of how can you govern future threats, what is it like to have a surveillance or a transparency society, what are the implications for social and political relationships, what happens to rights of privacy and rights of the individual and democracy as a larger whole when technology plays such a transformative role through security in everyday life. The interesting thing is that although both of the things I just said, the construction of a security speech and the thinking of threats and problems, and also the issues of technology and how they're impacting everyday security practice and therefore also democracy, both have clear utopian and dystopian undertones, but they're not really problematized as such in the literature of critical security studies. And so at the moment I'm interested in sort of teasing out the connections between these important concepts, which are much more treated in the humanities rather than the social sciences, and sort of import that discussion a little bit into what I do.
That's very interesting, because if you think about that, the term utopia was coined in the mid-16th century, and dystopian as a term came up 200 years later. It definitely has to do with the idea that dystopia is something much more related to technology. And from that on, we can talk about this interplay among the topics that you're referring to and how they are so close to technology and maybe like the fall of technology in a way, if we talk about how dystopian is kind of like a negative ideal place.
Right.
That comes.
Well, yes, I absolutely agree. I think the interesting thing for me is why hasn't this been picked up more? So popular culture definitely has picked up on this. So if you look at the most iconic movies articulating utopian or dystopian visions of the future, where they're talking about security issues, sometimes very clearly so, like terrorism, privacy, artificial intelligence, surveillance, etc. The future of democracy, if you think of V for Vendetta, is a clear case of that. So popular culture in film, in TV, increasingly, and in literature for centuries now, has picked up on the connection between the two things. Now, my hope is that because we've been having a narrative turn and a humanities turn in the social sciences and in security studies and international politics, so looking at popular culture more and more as analytical tools, and the issues of mediation, media, and the role that it's playing in our lives politically, my hope is that the topics will start to get more and more traction in my field. And to a certain extent, it's a recent interest for me. I mean, the other interests are very old, but thinking about them through the lens of Utopia and Dystopia and Entre Utopia as well, to a certain extent, is new for me. But hopefully, yeah, that's a contribution, that it highlights precisely the kinds of issues that you were talking about.
Yes. Maybe in those terms, to round up and have a final question, we could consider that the term dystopia is much more related to pop culture, to maybe science fiction, to every kind of product that goes along these lines. And from academia, to take a look at these issues that come from pop culture and integrate them, to have a critical view of our own fields and start working towards that. How important it is for you as an academic to actually somehow erode the limits and maybe even like destroy them completely between low culture and high culture? How do these things come?
I mean, for me, it's incredibly important. I'm not a big fan of boundaries. I mean, obviously, analytically, you need to have disciplines and concepts, and you need to work in discrete units. But you need some integrative drive as well. And so, my work has always been at the boundary of different disciplines. So, social anthropology, political sociology, international politics, among others, history, among others. Number one. Number two, I think that popular culture more and more is making its way into the classroom. So students today, is my feeling, have more of an issue for a variety of reasons with big, stuffy textbooks. You know, tell a student to read Marx, a whole book, 500 pages. It's an uphill battle. However, if you get a student to read a book that discusses issues that are discussed in Marx, or see a movie or a TV series, and then you bring in the analysis afterwards when he's already hooked on the issue, and the book is not a chore, but it's a solution for a problem he has found analytically while looking at popular culture, and suddenly the relations are much clearer. I mean, in my own work and my own teaching, sometimes I do international relations theory, they don't understand it, then I teach it with zombies and international relations theory, or Game of Thrones and international relations theory, and suddenly they seem to grasp the issues much better, and then they're curious to move into more abstract forms of thinking. So in that sense, I do hope that the boundaries are breaking down. I mean, I do see that in class, not just mine, but in many classrooms, many colleagues working on that. Even in international relations, people working on science fiction, books on Star Trek, Game of Thrones, Battlestar Galactica, Harry Potter, and international relations as pedagogical tools for teaching, but also as a provocative way of calling up some real complex problems that we have to deal with, but through a different lens. And I think that's really the future. So in that sense, that also erodes clear boundaries between social science and the humanities, and calls upon people that are working on text, textuality, mediation, etc., narrative politics, etc., discourse analysis, and brings them into our field, which I think is an advantage.
It is an advantage to democratize the access and the tools that we have to provide.
Absolutely.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this nice interview.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.